Hi there, and welcome to Ben's English Lab. If it's the first time you've come across my face, I am Benjamin Adebayo, and this channel right here is Ben's Voice Narrative. And of course, the session you're about to watch is Ben's English Laboratory, Ben's English Lab in short. And what I do here is dissect English language concept for everyday use and exam situation. And in today's class, we want to look at two determinants. Determinants are a type of adjectives, okay? These two words we're going to look at today are one, few, F-E-W, few, and two, little, L-I-T-T-L-E, little. So, like I said, these two words belong to a part of speech known as adjectives, and under adjectives we have a subclass known as determinant. So, little and few belong to a type of adjectives known as determinants. Right, so what are our objectives for today's class? We have a couple of them actually. So first of all, we want to understand what determinants are. What do we mean by determinants? And secondly, we want to understand the meanings of two phenomena. First being count nouns, and secondly, non-count nouns. And thirdly, we want to look at the rules to reply each time you want to use these two determinants, little and few, in everyday situation or under exam circumstance. So, without any much ado, let's dive right into the class. Remember, I said that these two words we're going to look at today, few and little, are a type of adjectives, right? And I said that under adjectives, we have subclasses, and one of the subclasses that we have is what we call determinants. And these two words, little and few, belong to the subset of determinants. So what are determinants? Determinants are adjectives that talk about quantity of subjects, quantity of phenomena. So determinants describe objects, they describe subjects, they describe things in terms of quantity value, right? Quantity value. So now let's understand what little and few mean. So the word little is a determiner that is used to describe non-count nouns. Non-count nouns are also called uncountable nouns. So what are non-count nouns? These are nouns that you cannot count, nominal subject, nominal items, nominal phenomena that you cannot count. For example, you have sand, you have water, you have air, you have light, we have salt, we have gas. So these are the examples that come to mind as I speak, because I'm trying to think about subjects or phenomena that we have that we basically can relate with within the house. So I've talked about salt being a non-count noun. Water, of course, we will use water every day. Water is life. So water, oil, it could be your palm oil, the groundnut oil, sand, beans, rice, to mention just a few. And so let's go to the second word, few. The word few is a determiner that helps us to describe countable nouns or count nouns. So as the word suggests, count nouns are nominal subjects, items, objects, phenomena that we can count, that we can number. And examples include human being, it could be football, person, table, spoon, books, airbrush, cup, just to mention a few. So remember that you use the word little only when you want to describe the quantity of what you cannot count, while you use the word few when you want to describe, in terms of quantity, a phenomenon that you can count. Right, that established, let's understand the rules that guide the specific usage of these two words. Now, before we go into the rules, I need you to understand something, and that is the fact that now these two words have two situations under which they can be used. First, you have a positive situation, and then you have a negative situation. Positive situation in this case simply refers to when we can afford to help people, or when you can afford to lend a hand of assistance to people. While on the other hand, the negative situation is simply talking about a negative attitude that is situation in which you don't have the ability or the capacity to render a help or an assistance to people. Right, that said, now let's understand that there are other parts, there are other forms of these two words, few and a little. Now, for little, we have little, we have a little, we have just a little, we have only a little. I take that again. We have little, we have only a little, we have just a little, we have very little. Okay, and for few, we have few, we have a few, we have just a few, we have only a few. I hope I captured everything. I said we have few, we have a few, we have just a few, we have only a few, and we have very few. Now, out of all of these other forms of few and little, you should understand that the only time we can use few for a positive situation is when we have the word a few. A few. So out of all of these sub-forms or subsets of few and a little, the only time we can use few and little for positive situation is when we have the phrase a few or a little and a few. These are the only phrases with few and little that represent positive attitude. So for example, if you can afford to help somebody in a particular situation or context, then you're expected to use a few or a little. So let's have example. So if you have countable materials or things in the house and somebody walks up to you to borrow some of those things. Let's say you have onions, for example, or fruits, and of course you can count fruits: apple, the cherry, the pineapple, whatever it is, what fruits are, mango. Now, and somebody wants you to give some to them, and you can afford to give them out because you have quite a lot of apples or fruit in the house. A positive situation where you can afford to help them out, where you can afford to assist them. You say, oh well, I can help you. I have a few apples left. Oh, let me fetch you some. I still have a few left, right? So that is in a situation where you can afford to help. And if it's onions or clothes or cups, whatever it is that you have, just simply say, oh, I can help you because I have a few left. I have a few left. And that is when you're talking about countable items that you can still afford to give out because you have a couple of them still with you. And when you have people come around to ask you or to talk about uncountable items, so maybe they need items from you, and these are items that you cannot count and you can afford to help them because you have a lot of those things. Let's say, for example, you have a drum that is filled with water and you have a neighbor who needs just a cup of water, and the person comes knocking at the door and plays with you to fetch them some water. You say, hey, why not? So I have a little water left in the drum. And of course, this is a situation where the drum is not water filled. So you just say, come on, I can help you. Though my drum is not filled, I can still fetch you some. I have a little water left, so I can help you. So remember, a little is for a situation where you can help, right? And a few is for a situation where you can afford to help. But the only difference is that you use a few for objects or phenomenon or substances that you can count. Like this object in my hand, you can afford to help. So this is countable. I'll just say the microphone, as I have 10 microphones on the table, and somebody comes knocking and say, can you please lend me 2 microphones? So I simply say, why not? I can help you because I have a few left. After giving out 2, I'll still have a couple left. I'll still have a few remaining. So I have a few, so I can lend you. Do you understand? So I don't know if you got the point now, but if it's what you cannot count, say your rice or your beans or the oil you have in the bottle, whatever, and somebody comes knocking to ask you for help, please, do you have some oil to give me? Oh, so why not? So I still have a little left in the keg. So let me fetch you some. So this is the only time you can use little and few in positive situation. That is to describe positive attitude. So now let's go to the negative times or negative situations in which we can use little and a few. Remember that you use few for items that you can count nouns in other words, and you use little for items that you cannot count, that is non-count noun. So now let's go to the context or situation in which you can only use little and few in negative situation. Now remember, the negative situation in this case is a context in which you cannot afford to give something out to people simply because what you have is not enough to spare some out. So that is what negative situation in this case refers to, right? So besides a few and besides a little, every other subset I mentioned previously are the kinds that we use for negative situations. For example, if we want to deal with few, for example, for a negative situation where you cannot afford to help people, we use few. I can't help you. I can't give you some apples. I can't give you any apples now because I have just a few remaining. I can't help you because I have few apples left. I can't help you because I have very few apples left. I can't help you because I have only a few apples left. Do you understand? So only a few, just a few, very few, just a very few, or very few. All of these subsidiaries of few are what we use for negative situations when you cannot afford to help people. Is that clear? Now, the same applies to little. So we have little, very little, just a little, only a little. All of the subsidiaries are phrases that you use for negative situations when you cannot afford to give out non-count nouns. Let's say that you have insufficient oil, salt, water, or gas at home, and somebody comes knocking at the door and wants you to help them out, and you say, hey, I can't fetch you any oil now because I have just a little left. I have only a little left myself, or I have very little left in the house. So these are the situations in which you can use little in a negative situation. So with that, we have come to the end of this class. But before we go, remember that there is an assignment or class exercise waiting for you at the end of this video. So I would appreciate it if you can attempt the exercises. That way I can be sure that you've understood today's class and you are good to go to reply these words appropriately under the right situation. Remember, the little is used for non-count nouns and few is used for count nouns, that is countable nouns. And a few and a little are used for positive situations when you can afford to help people, while very few, just a few, only a few, and little, very little, just a little, only a little. All of these are the forms of little and few that we use to represent negative situation. Thanks so very much for waiting to the end of this class. God's blessings to you. Remember, there's an exercise waiting for you at the end of this video. See you in the next class. Bye for now.